Given the last year when you had some very other notable figures now in handcuffs or, facing kind of like serious legal charges, how does it impact you? Do you feel pressure that you are sort of the face of legitimacy for crypto? Does that impact what you say? Do you find yourself living life differently? What does the weight of that do to you?
I mean, it definitely puts more pressure on me.
Ladies and gentlemen, today is a true delight. This is someone I've been a fan of for a very, very long time. This is someone who's continues to have deep impact in the space that I work in. And I really think like all of technology. And even if it's not for his work in, crypto, I really think he's one of the, smartest, deepest thinkers in a lot of fields. So it is a pleasure to welcome somebody who genuinely needs no introduction. The one, the only, the co-founder of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin. Vitalik! Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jerem and Arathi. It's good to be here.
Okay, we're going to start you off on an easy question. All right, so it's been to put it mildly, an eventful year in the world of crypto. When we look back, the merge is honestly maybe one of the greatest software development projects undertaken by mankind. I generally think so. I would say very much in the good bucket.
Yeah.
But also, as an industry, we've had to deal with, some very famous people and companies blowing up. So my question to you is, if you had to kind of look back on the last 12, 16, 18 months, what do you see as the good? What do you see as the bad? And maybe more interesting is, what are beliefs of yours that you feel have been reinforced? And what are beliefs or priors that you've now shifted?
I think the biggest shift in my thinking over the last 18 months or so has been this realization that basically Ethereum and in crypto more broadly really are moving from this kind of earlier phase where things were still being figured out. It was still mostly being experimented on within a small community, and there's really good tech being developed, but there wasn't too much very large scale stuff happening into a technology that really needs to be ready for the world and needs to be ready to solve real world problems for people, right? Like for the basically first maybe 5 to 7 years of Ethereum, like there's a lot of things that were being discussed and a lot of things that were being worked on. If you listen to presentations from me back from 2015 or 2016, I was talking about the same things I'm talking about now. Like, you could hear me talking about the importance of proof of stake. You could hear me talking about the importance of scalability, the importance of privacy, right? And I actually, for one of my recent presentations, dug up a slide that I gave in Taipei in 2017. And one of the slides there, like basically literally said, the top 3 problems of Ethereum are, scalability and privacy and wallet security. Core topics from a technological level are basically the same. And, it's basically, I think, settled and continues to be settled that those are the important things. But what's changed is the level of detail and the level of specificity at which some of those discussions have been had. Right, so proof of stake is basically out, and we do still need to improve the proof of stake algorithm over time, right? But it's a lot less theoretical and a lot more of this kind of practical. Let's respond to real world problems, like we might have an issue with validator centralization. Let's figure out what are the specific things that are preventing more validators from being willing to solo stake, for example. We have these rollups, but what does it actually take to get those rollups out to the point where the average user is on a rollup? Do we have to standardize things? Do we have to make it easier for wallets to work across rollups? There's a lot more of these ecosystem coordination tasks that are happening. Another big shift, I think, has been this shift from focusing on the abstract and focusing on making the platform as general purpose as possible into questions of what are some changes that would make it much more concretely useful and solve specific problems that we've identified. One recent change, I think, is that we're starting to become more okay with enshrining more features in the protocol. So like basically instead of saying like, oh, a transaction is going to be just a call and everything else can be built by users on top, the platform is going to be maximally abstract, like actually being willing to be opinionated about a couple of more things in the base protocol itself, because if those things are opinionated, then you can actually protect those features, you can upgrade them over time, you can ensure that users get censorship resistance guarantees, for example. You can ensure that they can be as efficient as possible. More and more of this like solid focus on like, what are the features that users, or what are the problems that users have, and like what are things people need, and like going towards serving those things.
Got it. But doesn't adding more features into the platform, into the core infra, does it not make it less general purpose?
It doesn't have to. Right? Like there's a type of feature that involves making the protocol more complex, and there is a type of feature that involves keeping the complexity the same, or even sometimes reducing it a little, but still at the same time pushing it in directions that sometimes solve problems directly, but sometimes just enable solving problems.
Interesting. Okay.
Kind of just diving a bit deeper, you wrote this post recently, which I think you just kind of referred to, which is you talked about the three transitions. You talked about L2 scalability. You talked about wallet security, kind of the account abstraction that brought bucket of things, and you talked about privacy. I'm curious, like if you kind of had to stack rank them, and if you had to maybe kind of like generate, kind of focus the energy of the community into be like, hey, this is something to kind of like deeply care about. Like, what would you pick, and what order, and why?
I think top priority is scalability. Like for the average user, the system is too expensive to use in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah.
Let's take, for example, like names, right? Like ENS. That's, there's a lot of decentralized, social media things happening for like, we've been talking about Farcaster recently. There's a bunch more. And like, it's nice if all of these things can actually be on a decentralized naming system, right? But the challenge is that, ENS as it exists, it takes like several dollars to pay the transaction fees, and sometimes that amount even goes up. Like if Ethereum becomes more successful, it might go up to $50. And like, these are not acceptable amounts for a social network, right? Like for a social network, people want, setup of an account to be like, free or maybe nearly free. Like if it's a few cents, then that's fine. Right? But, you don't want this thing where it costs, some random number between 0 and 200, and then, you can't really rely on it to be less than that. And, I think that's true for payments, like the whole using Bitcoin or Ethereum to pay for things vision, like it basically broke because the fees were too high. There's like lots of things broke because the fees are high, right? And I think that, if you don't solve that, then like there's not much point in having trying to solve other things.
What's the benchmark or gold standard for payments, for example? Is it more like replacing Web2 transactions, like credit card processing, that kind of thing? Like what do you look for on like, this is the delta or the gap to go bridge?
So the target that I had set for the ecosystem back in 2018 was under 5 cents a transaction, and I'm still sticking to it.
That's amazing. A couple years ago, I'd have been like, wow, that's kind of audacious, kind of a very ambitious goal. But, in just the last year or so, the progress has just been like amazing.
Yeah. You mentioned Farcaster, obviously, I'm involved with, what they're building. But I do think like what you pointed out that if somebody's signing up for a social network, if it's going to cost a undefined amount of money, if it's going to be slow, you already have a hard enough time getting people to use something new, and these just get in the way. So I think one, scalability, but then second, for example, the ability, for example, products to pay gas fees on behalf of people signing up, etc. Like those are like just like very, very
speed.
Yeah, and speed obviously are like really interesting. For those of us kind of work in the ecosystem, this might be like kind of like ad nauseum. But for if somebody's new to crypto, I guess one question they would ask, just looking at the last year, is there's been a lot of negative headlines on crypto, right? And I think a lot of us who work in the space, we probably talked about it a million times in various formats. But I have to ask, so if you look at all the bad stuff which has happened over the last year, what are lessons do you think for the industry, or what are things that what do you now believe that you didn't last year?
I think one thing that like everything in the last 1.5 years has made me appreciate more is just the need to like really focus on the values in the ecosystem and focus on the long-term fundamentals. Like basically, ask the question like, is this something where it makes mathematical sense for it to survive for even 10 years? If not 100, and is this something where the way that blockchains are used actually makes sense, and it doesn't make sense to just run the thing on a regular database? And finally, like, is the thing congruent with the values that the crypto space is trying to elevate, right? Like, getting people 19% annual interest rates is like not sustainable, and it's like totally not the thing that Satoshi was excited about, or the cypherpunks were excited about, or any of that, right? And I think there are a lot of people that just were sort of naively following trends, and they saw like, DeFi today is giving 12% interest rates. During the liquidity boom era of the 2020, sometimes the liquidity farming rates all got all the way up to like 90%, right? And like there was this big story where the narrative was, hey, DeFi can give you higher interest rates than TradFi. This is why DeFi will succeed. And like none of those people were actually able to articulate a sustainable story of why DeFi should be able to give better interest rates than TradFi, right? They were just saying like, hey, look at what's happening today. This will only grow, right? And I think what we've seen since then is in the best case, the interest rates just kind of quietly and slowly drops down to 3%, 2%, fairly reasonable numbers, sometimes 0. And in the unhappy case, like you had Duke One and the whole Terra Luna thing, and it basically blew up and like destroyed $20 billion of people's money, right? So you have to like look at that kind of long-term sustainability. One thing that really just stood up as a red flag on FTX, I think, both to me and to a lot of people in the Ethereum ecosystem, but like I think a lot of people have this misconception that like, everybody deeply respected Sam, and he caught the entire ecosystem by surprise. And I think it is true that nobody expected a literal, $8 billion blow up. But if you look at like even some Ethereum influencers, like even Anthony Sassano, like some of those, like a lot of them disrespected him and FTX from the beginning. And I think one of the reasons why was that he was just not able to articulate a vision of why crypto is good, right? Like he just clearly basically saw it as purely a business opportunity, right? It's like, oh, hey, crypto is this thing where you can make money. And fairly late in the whole situation, like in 2022 in June, he was finally he came out with this tweet thread. And honestly, the tweet thread was not super impressive. Like it was basically, regurgitating other people's, perspectives of like, disintermediation is good, creating more open markets is good, and like, all of the, things that have been said by influencers for years. And like he just, I think, never really struck the community as a person who deeply believed it. And that more than anything else might really be like the kind of the cause of the distrust that existed already, right? And I think like that's it. This is the thing that like I'm realizing, right, that like we really need to start creating things that have that kind of like both sort of like sustainability with respect to users, but also this kind of like values alignments, right? Like where the thing that you're trying to build and the things that you're trying to give people are actually congruent with the properties and the vision that the technology have. And like that's the sort of thing I want to see more of.
I've been spending a lot of time with policymakers and others, and I've been kind of talking about something which I'm kind of curious whether you agree with, tied to what you just talked about with kind of like some of the blows last year, which is financialization or over financialization is kind of like one part of crypto. But the core of crypto ideals like decentralization, credible neutrality, pretty much like the canon of blog posts when you kind of go scroll through your site. Financialization is sort of an aspect, but that is not the core piece of that. In some ways, I think you could argue maybe over-financialization has hurt crypto because it kind of like, brings in bad actors and it kind of distorts incentives. Do you agree with that? How do you kind of see financialization? And when I say that, I just very mean the incentive to go make money in any sort of product crypto. Do you see that as, how do you kind of see that in sort of the spectrum of incentives that crypto brings to the table?
Yeah, I mean, I've made many critiques of like different aspects of finalization on my blog, right? Like one of the big ones that I've made is like the fact that if you just look at like, make a standard Econ 101 analysis of how financialization interacts with governance, like you realize that it's just incredibly broken, right? And then we see things happen in practice, and we see it. But people for a few years, like I think, seriously thought of token holder voted DAOs as being some kind of magic and amazing revolution, and like crypto is good because like everything, including governance, will be tokenized, right? Do an Econ 101 analysis. Like that doesn't actually work because, you're like, as the amount of money that you have goes up, like the influence that you have on the portion of the thing that you benefit from goes up quadratically, right? And so the whole thing just like quickly becomes a plutocracy. And like, this is not like some kind of like, abstract Marxist critique of like, capitalism always gets worse and worse or anything like that. It's like a very specific argument about, token holder governance, right? And I feel like people had a hard time like really interpreting that. And like, they wanted narratives of like, either kind of capitalism good or capitalism bad or like, tokens good. But it's like that intersection just ended up being really pathological in a bunch of ways, right? And like I think now, there's like much less enthusiasm about token voting as a governance strategy. It's like people use it because they have to have governance of some kind, and like nothing better has really been legitimized yet, right? So like that would be one aspect, and then the whole NFT situation. I think it's interesting because it's this mixed bag. Like I visited Africa in February, and I met some of the people from the African NFT community, and there's like really fascinating art there, right? Like there's this kind of artistic movement called Afrofuturism, right, which tries to mix like elements of traditional African aesthetics with this kind of sci-fi future where you have people
Wakanda and Black Panther.
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly. Like in that exact direction, right? And there were people like putting a lot of deep thought and deep work into these NFTs, and there was this like really fascinating and kind of advanced NFT community that like did a good job of combining the cultural and the financial and making them work with each other. But then on the other side, you have these like $3 million monkeys. And then, you have this, like, these token-gated clubs in New York City that are basically, reinventing stuff that, like, people from the 1960s and 70s that I think people already started to consider lame in the early 2000s. But then, like, it's an ERC20, it becomes unlame again. It's this weird mixed bag. And I think there's good stuff, but the challenge that I see with like a lot of the less good stuff is that it creates this pressure to go in a direction which is like actually very unaligned with the other aspects of crypto. And like it's a sort of thing that makes sense as a short-term alliance, but then like as a longer-term alliance, there like there's just a lot of tensions that start and grow really quickly, right? Like even like if you look at the just how quickly, values like, self-custody, freedom, decentralization, like all of these things, and like just how quickly they just drop out from a lot of these NFT platforms, right? Like that's one of those things that concerns me often.
I guess when you say focusing more or going deeper into values more as like the lesson or the learning, another way to look at it, at least for me, was the tourists have left, right? And the true residents, the builders, are sticking it out and actually building and just hunkering down. Is that kind of how you see it? Is that the right way to go portray it? Or like, to me, it feels like there was this whole craze around, you can say like there are good parts of NFTs, but then you had a lot of tourists coming in. Same with like, the financial aspect of it, where you just had a lot of people coming in just for that, making a really quick return kind of thing. But now that, that market's kind of like frozen and, there's just this chill over that, they've left. Leaving behind like the forecasters of the world, the builders were just like hunkering down. How do you feel about that? Yeah.
I think that's one aspect to it. I think another aspect to it is also the kind of users.
Right.
So like one analogy that Amir Taki, this longtime crypto anarchist, of course, even in the Bitcoin land in 2013, made is he was talking about like Linux and Ubuntu. And how, like, there was this whole movement in the 2000s of trying to, make Linux on the desktop happen, right? And basically what happened was both Linux and the open source movement as a whole, it basically made this choice of, they're going to dilute themselves in order to become, more user-friendly and more friendly to mainstream users and to, like, mainstream capital funders, right? And even the word open source is part of that, right? Because like the earlier movement was called free software, and the new thing was called open source. And like free, like it has that substance, right? Like it has that vibe of like, hey, we're actually trying to create a social structure that's changes power relationships. But then when you say open source, it's like it feels like this sort of thing that everyone can get behind, and when everyone can get behind something, in some sense, that's actually it can be a sign that like in some sense there's no content at all, right? Like that's not always true, but I think it's kind of similar to how if you try to make a scientific hypothesis that's like compatible with every possible future, like it's not actually science, right?
Interesting.
And Taki's viewpoint is like, actually, Linux should go back to basically go back to serving, the geeks and like the community that like is smaller, but instead of getting a 1.1x benefit, they get a 10x benefit.
Just to disagree on that a little bit, Ubuntu actually played on a big part.
Lived through that.
Yeah, because Ubuntu would actually ship CDs to us and so on. The other lens I would have of it is pragmatism. Right, like one could argue that what Ubuntu did, and some of the decisions were they had closed source drivers. It wasn't the Richard Stallman free as in speech, GPL code stuff. But you could argue that directly led to the work in Android, where you now have some child or descendant of Linux running on millions of devices, and in a world where we were all running Richard Stallman's GNU Herd, and we would have never seen that alternative, but. I want to maybe kind of ask a slightly personal question, which you kind of been fascinated about, because one of the things which always fascinates me about you is in the absence of any of us knowing who Satoshi is, he, she, they, or maybe sentient GPT-10 coming back from the future or GPT-20, right? You are the most visible person in crypto. One of your favorite posts that you've ever written is the one about legitimacy being a scarce resource. Someday, I always say I want to write a book on that. And I think it's safe to say that you bring a lot of legitimacy to Ethereum. I'm not sure whether you see that your role that way, but I think a lot of other people do. And now, given the last year when you had some very other notable figures, now in handcuffs or facing kind of like serious legal charges, do you feel? How does it impact you? Do you feel pressure that you are sort of the face of legitimacy for crypto? Does that impact what you say? Do you find yourself living life differently? What does the weight of that do to you?
I mean, it definitely puts more pressure on me. Like there's just like basic effects. Like, I have to try to wear, weird hats to reduce the chance that people see me in public. And like, if, someone runs up to me and like, Vitalik, I could just like tap on the side of my head and pretends to be in a call, and like, here, I'll just put on the hat. It's like right here, right? So you just, you have this, and then, pull at this, and then like, it's like there, right?
Yeah, but
This is the sort of stuff that like I actually have to do these days.
can I give you some thoughts on that hat? By the way, I saw Vitalik
Sure.
at an event.
Right. No, you mentioned this to me. Yeah.
Vitalik is like, there is kind of this invisible force field where you can sort of sense this disturbance in the force, right? And actually, that hat it's not hiding your identity. It's not making you into Clark Kent over there.
Well, okay, so my theory on it is that the hat has a negative effect among people who are closer to the ecosystem, but it does have some hiding effect among people who are further, right?
Okay.
But outside of the hats, but see, do you find yourself worrying about what you say, what you do, the weight of how it, what it means?
Yeah, I guess, sometimes I definitely feel more responsibility to kind of be more active in terms of adding new things to the plot, I guess. There is definitely a lot of moments where, but things that were happening in the crypto ecosystem, were being done by other people and often, done by various, kinds of unsavory people. And it seems like a lot of them have kind of, disappeared in various ways, right? Sometimes it's peaceful retirement. Sometimes it's, some very, high profile event like an arrest or some
arrest in a country with questionable extradition laws. But yes,
there are even, 2 cases of arrest in the past year, I think, at least. Actually, some lower profile ones too, right? There's even some that we don't hear about, but it's basically interesting how sort of the number of other characters that we can count on is decreasing, and it's not even just the number of characters. It's how many we can actually count on, right? Things just keep getting revealed about some of these other characters, and there's a lot of them who just become really big and then have this long 2-year arc, and then at the end of the 2-year arc they just end up being completely disgraced. And this is that, if you just look back to earlier seasons, right? The season of 2016 to 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember EOS?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing, Ethereum on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Ethereum. It supports smart contracts, but it's better because it has high security. They don't do that stupid EVM stuff. They'll let you run contracts directly in C++ or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They actually have governance because they have a governance system based on a token. They're actually decentralized. Brendan, Bloomer, some of those other characters, got a whole bunch of money and we don't really hear from them much, right?
Yeah.
It's at some point, or how should I phrase this? A fundamental part of this whole space turning into something that's actually useful for people that get a great amount can get a great amount of value from it, right?
Yeah.
But you don't just mean technical people, right? By which I just mean people for whom crypto isn't a 1.1x, but for whom crypto is a 10x, right? People who want to participate more in international trade for and are in places where they feel locked out of that, for example, right? If we want to focus on the space that's actually useful for those kinds of things, then the kinds of stories that exist in the ecosystem should not involve $4 billion ICOs, out of which big portions of the money went into we don't really know where.
Yeah, I think it's so admirable because I was talking to a friend about, this is going to sound weird, but LeBron James, and one of the things, if you think about LeBron's career, he's had almost no scandal, and he's kind of always been this role model for not just on court but off court. And if you kind of hear his interviews, he kind of takes that role very seriously because he sees this as a role model for his community and the sport and so on. And that's basketball. That's been around for a while. There's been others. You play a notable role in crypto, so I think it's really important. Which maybe leads to another interesting question, which is a lot of people, I asked some other celebrities this, which is people often feel like they have a parasocial relationship with someone famous, right? They feel like they know you, they know your Wikipedia page, they've seen some photos of you, there are some interesting
video blogs,
lots of interesting memes, lots of interesting memes about you. What do you think people would not know about you that you'd like to clear right now?
To be honest, I kind of prefer people do less about me sometimes.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. like, I don't want, my life to be like a TV series for other people. Like, that would just put more pressure on me and make me hate my life, I know there's other people who lean into that, but like, honestly, I really don't want to.
Okay, changing gears, right? Like, I want to talk to you about EF and Ethereum and the systems around it. And the reason I bring that up is, when I think about how to build a decentralized system and an organization that supports it with the right incentive structure, it's credibly neutral, it has the trust of the community. I think what you have done over the last many years and what the EF has done is pretty notable. And I think a lot of folks in the community, would obviously very, very highly respect the work you've done. What if I were starting a new project today or a new effort today, what lessons can one learn from how you and obviously the many other amazing people who work with you have dealt with the EF and kind of built something which is actually truly decentralized?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the EF, right, is that like there's Ethereum, which is in a lot of ways a technical experiment, but then there's also the Ethereum Foundation, which is a social experiment. And the social side of it is basically like actually trying to create this big ecosystem and actually turn it into something that is very decentralized with a lot but by decentralized, I don't mean no leaders, right? Like, decentralization is not no leaders, decentralization is many leaders, right? And where there are lots of other people that are independently pushing lots of aspects of the ecosystem forward. And I didn't feel like the early Ethereum community I think had a very good start, right? There were a lot of people outside of the foundation that were very interested in helping out even from the beginning. But then there have been a lot more that have really emerged and kind of stepped forward in their own way over the last 5 years or so, right? The client teams, wallet teams, people outside of the foundation, submitting various proposals for Ethereum, participating in research, right? Like, Zero X Spark, a big zero knowledge group, but just all of these amazing teams that are really stepped up, become independent, become very strong. And at the same time, where we're still able to get this very high level of coordination between them, right? Like, the L2 teams are friends, their dev teams are talk to each other, they talk to the Ethereum Foundation, they talk to me, they're willing to collaborate on standardization. There's this really nice cooperative spirit between the L2 teams, between the L1 client teams, just across all of these different layers of the ecosystem. And one of the things I've been working on improving recently is the ability of this ecosystem to coordinate and figure out what is the decentralized equivalent of a project manager. And that exists, right? You can't order people around, but you can convince people, right? But it is a thing that actually can work, right? There's if you look at some of the work that's has been happening within the account abstraction community, for example, there's a couple of people whose basically job it is to just talk to the other participants in the 4337 ecosystem and figure out what some of the next standards should be, and gather all of these opinions about what kinds of things they need, what kinds of things that they care about. And there's a lot of people who are willing to kind of have discussions and actually move things forward on that front. And it's starting to really actually happen more and more, right? I mean, there's challenges, right? One of the challenges is that if you're one of the bigger wallets, then just your incentive to be standards compliant is much smaller, right? And the closer you are to a monopoly, the more that incentive is negative. But it's still happening, right? That's definitely something that makes me really happy, right? We want to see an ecosystem where if you zap any one organization out of existence, or even if you zap any one country out of existence, then the whole thing still continues, right? And I feel like we're actually very close to that. I think closer to that than like almost any other crypto ecosystem. Right? I think Bitcoin is comparable, right? But it's definitely something that like I personally really value, and I definitely want Ethereum to keep improving on.
Switching gears, I want to talk to you about something which I know we've chatted a little private over, but which is about Elon and Twitter. So it's been an eventful 8-10 months, obviously, in many spheres, and so I am curious, what have your observations, opinions been on this new era of Twitter? Because you're obviously very active on Twitter. You are always in my comments offering to give me ETH if I just wire ETH. Maybe that's not. I think that's not even taken care of. I think I don't see that much these days. It's obviously been like a very eventful time. A, what are your thoughts and observations? And B, if Elon handed the role to you for a interesting period of time, and you were, God, absolute dictator of Twitter for, 6 months to a year, what would you do?
Oh, dear. I think, I'll start by kind of answering the similar question of like, what kinds of things have I observed over the last, 8 months? I think one thing in Elon's favor is that a lot of people were predicting that 80% of the employees are gone and very quickly, and this is totally, reckless. And obviously, as a result of this, there's like lots of deep internal domain knowledge that'll be lost, and like Twitter will literally fail on a technical level, right? Like not even people saying mean stuff, but like actually, the website will stop working, right? Like there's a lot of people who are deeply convinced of this. And that just ended up being totally wrong. Like it ended up being much more wrong than I expected. Right? Like I expected, significantly more technical failures than this, right? And to be fair, there were technical failures in November and December, but like since then, that's kind of dropped off completely to the point where people don't even talk about that side of things, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess just interesting to look back on, right? I think, within our communities, there's always like one of these, great debates of like, when you see complexity in society, like, does that complexity reflect some kind of, deep experience that's accumulated over time that's really important? And, to what extent is that sometimes just kind of entropy and bloat and, you need sort of non-backwards compatible renewal? And I guess this incident was like, one incident on the second side of the argument. I mean, I think there's often many incidents on both sides of the argument, right? But it's one of those small things.
Yeah, I think one of the things which I think Elon really did is he shifted the Overton window of what is allowed if you're running a technology company. And now I know of many CEOs, and some of them have talked about this in public, who have now done exactly the same thing Elon has done, and maybe not in as dramatic a style as Elon has done it, but whether it is cutting back on the employee headcount, or maybe it is doing things like making blue check verification a paid feature, all these things which Elon was really criticized for, you see a lot of his peers kind of sneak through. And I think this would have been possible if he hadn't widened the Overton window of what was possible.
Right. Yeah, that is definitely true. Like, he's definitely very much a bulldozer, referencing my bulldozer versus Vitalik post from a couple of years ago. And bulldozers are tough and complicated thing that just have costs and benefits on both sides.
Right.
As far as blue checks go, I think the blue check thing is a mixed bag, and I do think that Elon did mishandle a lot of it. The thing that I think really empathize with the decision to radically reform blue checks is that I do think that blue checks were this realistically they were this de facto class system, right? And I remember even just myself personally, right? When I got my own blue check back in 2018, of I definitely felt that warm glow of I'm recognized by the system.
That is crazy to me. I mean, that you of all people would be well, this blue check makes me. I mean, there are enough things in the first paragraph of your Wikipedia page, which confer much higher status on you than that blue check.
That's true, but Twitter is the thing I interact with for a long time, or in many days. I mean, decreasing recently, but it was, and like Wikipedia, I almost never look at, but there was definitely this kind of sort of Maud and Bailey thing going on, where sort of the arguments defending blue checks is like, oh, these people need to be protected against being impersonated. But then, the Bailey was like, oh, like actually is a status symbol, right?
Right.
But like the negative side of it, though, is that I think he really deeply mishandled the transition, right? There was a lot of fraud happening, at the beginning. The whole, there wasn't, like really much actual verification going on. I mean, I think the verification isn't really good enough even today, right? It's like, you can be all kinds of crazy things in your name and like still get a blue check mark. And like, I'm not sure what it is now. I do remember like at the beginning of the year, like it was even explicitly mentioned that the blue check isn't doing any kind of like actual, KYC or whatever. It's just saying like it's proving that you paid. And I remember there was someone made the arguments that like, oh, just the fact that it costs $8 a month should be enough of a deterrent, and it ended up just like not being true at all, right? Yeah. So like a blue check system where anyone can, participate in, there's fair terms for everyone, and it actually does the verification of, checking that like you are the person that, your profile name claims to be. Like that's, I think that would work well.
I think the way they thought about it, and I was only involved very briefly, things might have changed, is that they pushed off the verification to the credit card handling. And the idea was that if you were reported and caught for any such thing, the credit card fraud processing pipeline, Apple Pay, et cetera, will make it so much harder for you to come back and be a bad actor. So that is kind of
but that solves for the trolls and like the spam bots, but not so much for like actually credible people. Like, the reason why you use blue checks is to kind of figure out who, like, are they who they say they are? Like, is Vitalik the actual person, as opposed to giving away tons of ETH in our comments?
By the way, for the record, Vitalik is not giving away ETH in your comments. But I don't think there's an original tragedy. Before we move on, like, there's an original tragedy because the original feature was meant to be, impersonation. Right. But given that it was operationally complex to do so, it very quickly became this person is important as deemed by the priests at Twitter.
Right.
And then Facebook copied it, and the Instagram copied it, and everyone copied it. So it kind of became this class system, which is a whole mess. Okay.
But there's kind of value in that.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are sad. They were like, well, now the peasants are here. That's what they were sad about. Okay. I want to...
Wait, was there anything else, Vitalik? If you were given control of Twitter, what would you do?
I'm trying to think what other things. Okay, community notes was something that I like. Like it seems like it actually does a good job of giving context on a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, at least it saves me some Googling where I'm like, wait, really? And then it's like there's community notes where I'm like, oh, okay, you just saved me a bunch of trouble of just like looking this up. So I find it valuable.
Right, exactly. I think that's good. I think Elon's whole thing of like, what was it? Back in December, like blocking, like links going to Mastodon and other things. Like, I thought that was uncool. But then I thought that his willingness to like basically put, his own neck under the guillotine of public opinion and make a fool of like, should I replace myself as CEO? Like, I found that deeply honorable. But then what I found less honorable is sort of the lack of follow-up. I mean, eventually there was follow-up, right? And that did impress me.
That is a new CEO. That is a new CEO, but maybe you could debate like who has, sort of the ultimate brains on things. But that is a new CEO now for sure. I do think, in his credit, I disagreed with the Mastodon link. I do think he's very good about reversing decisions. I mean, I think Paul Graham had disagreed with him and he reversed that. And which I think is an interesting thing because one thing I would say for Elon, I don't always agree with him. I agree with him a lot, is that it is no longer unclear who is making the decision. In the old Twitter, or sometimes, right, you're going to have this faceless corporate blog post, which is like, a decision has been made in passive voice. Yeah. Like, if Elon, it's clear, like, he's make the call. If you want to hate somebody, it's him. He's on the line, which I really appreciate. I want to talk about ChatGPT. I know you've been spending a lot of time, you in Silicon Valley, I think maybe several months ago, you kind of talk, I know you kind of talked to folks at OpenAI and some of the others. Kind of curious about just your take on all things GPT-4, ChatGPT, and kind of the broader conversation around risk. We just had Mark Andreessen come on the show. It's not out yet, but Mark kind of wrote this blog post about like basically saying the doomers are, kind of down with the doomers. Let's go build as much as possible. So A, your thoughts on ChatGPT, GPT-4, and state of the AI, and B is this whole space of risk, safety, alignment.
That stuff is challenging and very deep in a bunch of ways, right? I think in ChatGPT right now, right, it's in terms of just like the capabilities of the current thing, right? Like it's always important to sort of not get too catastrophic on it, right? Like it's it can do a lot of things, but there's a huge amount of things that it still can't do. And like I've used it myself, right? And I found that there are specific tasks that it's good at, but then there's a lot of tasks that it's like only good at 90% of the time, and you still have to check it over, right? Mm-hmm. There's some tasks that it's still not good at all. Like when I use it for coding, I think what I have to do is explain what I want in English. It gives me back something with mistakes, and sometimes I ask it to fix the mistakes, and sometimes I just go into the code and fix the mistakes myself, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the positive aspects of this is that I think it's a good example of how, like, instead of AI killing 30% of the jobs, which would be catastrophic and terrible, it's like AI is killing 30% of your job, which is like actually an amazing time saver, right? And now, to be clear, like, I don't think that's a stable thing that's going to hold forever, like, especially once AI approaches, much closer to human capabilities in a broader way. Like, there are going to be much more specific people whose jobs get replaced completely, right? But for at least this kind of, this stage one of the last section of the sprint to human level AI, like it's like that aspect of things is interesting, right? Like how it's it's empowering people like more than replacing people, at least so far. There are definitely cases where it's replacing people too, right? And I definitely hope that that we can kind of adapt to much more of that happening proactively, right? But just like seeing that other side is interesting. Yeah. There are other places where I feel like it's not happening enough and it's starting to happen. Like one of my disagreements with the way that things like Stable Diffusion were released is that the way that Stable Diffusion was released at the beginning, right, was that basically you type in one sentence and or whatever your prompt is, and it just gives you a thing. And like, if the use case is you look at a thing in order to be impressed and dazzled, then like it gives you that, and it does an amazing job of that. If your use case is I need an image that contains specific things for a specific application, it's like actually really horrible at that, right? Like there's always a couple of things that are wrong, that are not what you wanted, in ways that you were not able to like think about ahead of time. And like what you want is you want the ability to edit, right? Like what you want is that kind of interactive workflow of like, okay, give me this picture of a couple of people in a forest where one of them is holding a QR code and the other person is scanning it. It's like, no, I don't want the hands to look like that. Retry the hands. And like, no, I actually want this. I actually want this tree to be a bit higher because it's more beautiful. And like, do you want the like interactive
state,
workflow, right?
Yeah.
And like early forms of stable like diffusion and those kinds of things, because of their choice to present themselves as being like full image generators instead of being interactive tools, like they both, I think, needlessly amplified this kind of scare of am I going to be replaced, right? And they also just like were less useful as products, right? But then like what I want is not a full thing that generates an image by itself. What I want is like better Photoshop. And the newer versions do seem to be moving in the direction of like being better Photoshop, right?
Right.
Like I think the story and the thing happening that we don't want to see is like artists getting replaced. The thing that I want to see is someone, it's an author, instead of just being able to write a novel, also being able to personally make a movie, right?
Right.
Like, I would love to see the cost of making a movie go down from $100,000 to like one person with basically just his creativity and a couple of months with an AI platform, right? Like, if we do that, then like, we actually, get to disrupt Hollywood. We get to like get away from all of these, horrible remixes of like, Marvel fights King Kong with a touch of, Star Trek versus Star Wars on the side.
Yeah.
And like, get to like actual real stories and like, reflecting like different people's values instead of just an event that, an attempts to like try to please everyone, but end up pleasing no one.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
That kind of like enhancement of existing individual creativity, like that excites me, right? And like that's very different from, AI replacing a person, which is, it's what the narrative shifted and it's what the early versions of the technology looked more like. And so I think, like some of the stuff that kind of involves a lot more kind of, pinging back and forth between kind of human input and, the LLM or the diffusion, like that's better. Yeah. So that's like short and medium term, right?
Yeah.
Medium to long term is like, is this stuff going to kill all of us? And that's, one answer I'd have to that is like, I don't know. I see these really compelling arguments from the AI risk people, but then like we've had a long multi-hundred-year history of people predicting all kinds of really awful consequences to the next wave of technology. And like what's happened over and over again for centuries is we adapt, right? And I think you can make a strong case that like this new wave really is different. Like we're not just, replacing one or two faculties of humans in a way that can easily work together with us. It's like, no, this is creating a new and higher form of intelligence. And like, that's like scary in a way that the world hasn't seen for like 100,000 years, right? Like this, the human to superhuman AI transition, like that level of transition, I would argue has only happened basically 3 or 4 times in the history of the Earth, right? Before that, we had the monkey to human transition. Before that, we had the single cellular to multicellular life transition. And before that, we had the no life to life transition. Yeah. But like literally, basically 3 transitions on that same order. And so, and each of those really fundamentally rearranged the Earth in deep ways, right? And so AI obviously will fundamentally rearrange the Earth in deep ways. And often those rearrangements, they were not friendly to the stuff that existed before, right? Like humans coming to dominate the Earth has been horrible for a lot of animal and plant species that have existed before, right? So I feel like I get their arguments and like I get the reasons to believe the things that they believe. And I also, get the arguments on the other side. And so I think right now I find myself like definitely, on the side of wanting to support much more research into creating more aligned AIs, definitely wanting to support much more research in creating AI systems that work more closely with humans and are better at incorporating human intention and, don't go off on like long planning loops on their own. Definitely, want to see more, like work on, like if there's some kind of reasonable regulation that like slows down the really dangerous stuff, but, at the same time doesn't, ban like, open source stuff that's happening on people's laptops. And then like definitely, interested in that. But, at the same time, like there's like don't want to see something that ends up just like going after totally the wrong things and doesn't actually solve the big problems. Right? Like in some ways, like the worst outcome that can happen is if the government tries really hard to, regulate AI to prevent people from saying mean things on the internet, but at the same time, it gets adopted by militaries.
That's a very likely scenario, and a very real scenario is you get a hostile government, or what we would perceive a hostile government in the US to adopt it, and they are not going to, listen to our restrictions on floating point operations. So that
I also think in a lot of these cases, while I appreciate that the intentions are pure and genuine on like alignment, I just worry that it is just deeply incentivized for like the bigger companies, the incumbents to have this in their advantage, and it's like less advantageous for startups to be able to innovate because more regulation and more alignment and more of these regulatory bodies kicking in almost always in history has helped the bigger companies and has always prevented smaller, scrappier, more like innovative companies to like push through because there's just so much barrier to entry now. And I worry that even before you kick off this whole wave of tremendous AI innovation, you're just going to get like all of these startups just getting curtailed because of just like regulation and just all of this policies kicking in.
Yeah, I definitely worry about that. Like, I think it is hypothetically possible to, make regulation that only applies for, computing clusters of a, very large size and like leaves individuals alone and all of that. But the question is like, does it, like, would actually existing politics lead to that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. One last question I had, and this is kind of a total shift in transition. One of or a couple of my favorite blog posts that you've ever written, and I'll give you the context on this, is on zk-SNARKs, and you talked about privacy. And, you'd also, in the 3 transitions part, you'd also talked about privacy, especially around identity. Both Freedom and I, we've spent years working on social media networks. I spent a lot of time building communities and community systems. And so the part, I was very unaware of this whole ecosystem of zk-SNARKs until I read your posts. To me, what really caught my eye was around negative reputation and building a reputation system and how you could have, like the chaining posts, like the basics of it. So I had to go through the whole math of it, which is like really dense, but really fun and interesting. So I guess like, just rolling up, all the way back 5 years ago, probably 5 years ago, if you'd looked at this, you'd have said, a normal person would have said, wow, like you literally call this moon math, right? Really complex. It's just the computation time for all of these just kind of crazy. Looking at, the progress in the last 5-ish years, would you have been surprised like 5 years ago, looking at just the tremendous pace of like just innovation? And what do you see as the future for zk-SNARKs and zk as such?
Yeah, I mean, very surprised. Like, I've basically made an analogy before many times between zk-SNARKs and transformers, right? Like, the AI thing that LLMs are based on now. Basically that like the thing that transformers did, right, is they basically like took, hundreds of very smart people's many years worth of like application specific work that they put years into on solving specific problems and basically said like, hey, let's throw out the trash. Let's just do a few matrix multiplies on the entire internet and like this new thing that's like 200 lines of like human written code just that like totally beats all of your benchmarks on like half of everything, right? And zk-SNARKs are kind of the same for crypto. Like there were these very deep and complicated problems that I remember personally spending months on, right? Like one of these is there was this earlier scaling solution before rollups called Plasma that was basically trying to do scalability for payments by doing this kind of on-chain, off-chain hybrid thing. And one of the big challenges there was this problem of defragmentation, right? It's like, in order for Plasma to work, you have to like actually treat every coin kind of as a separate NFT. And like, you don't own, 50,000 coins in the abstract. It's like you own coins number 90,000 through 139,999. Right. And the problem is like, as people receive and send payments to each other, like you give away a slice of your coins in one place, then other people, you get coins in a totally different place. And eventually, like your coins get split between many fragments, and it just becomes more and more expensive to make payments.
Right.
Now, I spent months on this problem. zk-SNARKs, trivial. You just make a SNARK of a permutation and you're done, right? That kind of, then if you look at zk-EVMs, for example, the issue with zk-EVMs is basically just prove that EVM execution is correct. And they potentially can reduce the size that you need to run a fully verified node of a system from like this really big thing that requires like basically an entire laptop to just like something that could trivially run on a phone, right? Like the Ethereum clients of 10 years in the future, I expect, are going to basically be systems where you download 3.6 megabytes from the internet, you hash it, you run a couple of polynomial equations, done, verified. Get 3.6 more megabytes, hash it, run a polynomial equation, done. Right. And it's just like very, lightweight, very simple, a few hundred lines of code to verify for most of an entire client sort of thing. Right. And it just like massively increases that possibilities in a way that was totally not possible before. Right. And on the privacy side, it's the same. Right. Like if you remember privacy back in 2015, that's like, we had CoinJoin and we have stealth addresses and we have this complicated bulletproof thing, and we have this like mix-in, and you need to go through many different mix-ins to get enough privacy, and like the privacy properties are actually difficult to calculate, and Ian Myers found this like weird thing where if you make 2 payments to a merchant, so that's often enough for them to de-anonymize you, and like there's this hot mess, and then you go and have zk-SNARKs, and with zk-SNARKs you can just prove whatever thing you want, right? And like you can even do crazy stuff that, like, for example, you prove that these coins that you have are coins from someone who entered the system, but you at the same time prove that those coins did not come from a known list of DeFi hacks, right? So like you could give people privacy and at the same time like solve a large class of problems that regulators have, right? And like these kinds of things are just like amazing, right? And there's a lot that we can do. Like I actually think that if we add the privacy components, then the whole institutional enterprise government blockchain thing, like it goes back to being viable again, right? Because like if all you're doing is like just providing transparency and authenticity, and like that's not enough, right? Like that's for a lot of applications where trust already exists, the kind of distrust that exists is not like distrust about people running the database incorrectly. It's usually distrust about privacy, right? And so if you bring in the zero knowledge proofs, then like suddenly those things actually start making much more sense again, right? So I am super excited about SNARKs for both the scalability and the privacy applications, and I'm excited to see where that whole space goes.
It's amazing. I think the momentum in just a short years and just amazing smart people doing this is fantastic. Okay, one thing that kind of strikes me is you're so generous in giving credit to a lot of others in the Ethereum ecosystem, from like Break and Dankrat and a bunch of others, and there is a world when ETH finishes its roadmap, and obviously the point of the whole roadmap is you don't have dramatic quick changes, you have stable changes. What does Vitalik Buterin work on then? When is your job done? In that case, where do you go off in your floppy hat and what do you go work on?
Keep on working on my blog, eventually turn it into a proper Schweitzer Codex competitor. I don't know.
I like it, or less wrong, like a less wrong than a less wrong could be good too. Thank you so much. This is truly a delight. And I just want to say, I think a lot of us in the crypto community, just thank you for everything you've done. You should come back and see us. And for folks listening, Vitalik is not giving you money in your Twitter replies. And if you see a man in a hat, maybe leave him alone until you really want to go talk to him. Then go talk to him. But Vitalik, this is a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was
great fun.
Thanks so much, Vitalik.